Hey watch family, Ranch Racer here from Love and Watches, and welcome to another edition of On the Bench. Today is going to be a little bit different. Rather than reviewing a watch or talking about a specific watch, I'm going to talk about a topic that I think is a little bit confusing to some, and that is watch size. And I think the reason I wanted to do this is because there's a common misconception out there that the only measurement that really matters is the diameter of the case. And while that is important, it is most certainly not the only measurement that you should take into account if you're looking at a watch. And I think what really brought this about was I have some colleagues, there are a couple of folks that were looking at different watches, and they made a comment to me, oh, it's too big or it's too small. They'd never tried it on, never seen it in person, just making that judgment based on the diameter. And I have a couple watches here that I'm going to use for this discussion. The first one is the brand new 2018 reissue of the Bulova Oceanographer 666 Devil Diver. This was announced at Baselworld this year. Actually, it was announced back in 2017, but officially shown at Baselworld this year. Really fun piece. 40 millimeters in diameter, kind of that vintage turtle-esque type case shape. Now, the other watch that we're going to be using today is a watch that I actually purchased for Perpetual Girl this year. This is a late 90s Rolex Explorer in the 36 millimeter size. So this is a watch that, for my 7.5-inch wrist, I never considered wearing this watch. It was just, too small, because I had tried on like some 38s and those types of pieces, and they were just too small. So I never considered this as a viable piece for me to wear. And recently, after throwing this specific NATO strap on it, I completely changed my mind. So with that, let's start looking at some of the basics with these guys. So if we look first at the Oceanographer, and we take our trusty calipers here and we do a case diameter measurement. Okay, it's 40.5, and that's actually the official specs from Bulova, is a 40.5 millimeter diameter case. Okay, and again, just to confirm, the Rolex is just shy of 36, but officially it's a 36 millimeter. Okay, so from those two specs, you would immediately just kind of make the assumption that the Bulova is going to wear larger than the Explorer, and that's not necessarily the case. So what else do we need to be looking at? One of the most important measurements to look at when you're considering a watch is what's called the lug to lug. So that's the measurement from lug tip to lug tip. All right, so let's take a look at that now. On the Bulova, we are looking at about 42.5 millimeters, which is a very, very nice lug to lug measurement in terms of how a watch is going to fit. So now let's take a look at the Explorer. And we find with the Explorer, 44. Right? So again, 44 for the Explorer, 42.5 for the Bulova. So the Explorer is actually longer tip to tip on the lugs, 1.5 millimeters longer than the Bulova. Okay, so some other measurements to think about. Let's look at what I call interlug width. Some people just call it bracelet width, but interlug width on the Explorer is 20 millimeters. And if we look at the Bulova, just shy of 18, but officially it's an 18 millimeter. Okay, so again, the Explorer has a larger lug-to-lug measurement, and it's got a wider strap measurement, bracelet measurement, okay? So far what we're looking at is a much larger diameter case with the Bulova at 40 versus 36 for the Explorer. But in the other two measurements we've taken, the Explorer is larger, lug-to-lug, as well as bracelet width. Let's take a look at another measurement. We're going to measure thickness. Okay, about just over 13. Call it 13 millimeter thickness, or 13 1/4 on the Bulova. And with the NATO strap, okay, because when you have a NATO on here, this adds to the overall thickness of the watch. Right around 13, 12.98, so call it 13. Very, very close on thickness. All right. Okay, so we've got a few measurements. Now let's take a look at these two pieces on the wrist. First, let's look at the Bulova. Okay, now keeping in mind my wrist is 7.5 inches around. This one, when I first tried it on, it felt a little bit small, okay? And again, there's a couple factors that weigh into how I felt when I put this particular watch on my wrist. Number one, the lug-to-lug. Remember, we measured the two of them, and this has a shorter lug-to-lug distance than the Explorer. The second is the bracelet width, or the lug width, okay? That makes a big, big difference. The width of the bracelet makes this watch feel a little more delicate, a little lighter. Therefore, it wears. We always talk about how a watch wears. To me, this watch wears pretty small. All right, a lot smaller than other watches that I have in a 40 millimeter measurement. And I'm going to bring another watch in at the end of this video. Actually, I'll bring it in probably before the end, to show you what a huge difference that makes, okay? So that's the Bulova. So now, let's try on the Explorer. And again, this is not a watch that I ever considered wearing until about a week ago. It was sitting there, and I thought, you know, I'm just gonna throw a NATO on there and see what it looks like. And let's see. NATO's a little bit hard to strap while on camera, so I apologize for that. Okay, there's the Explorer. To me, this felt larger. Okay, now again, there's a couple reasons for that we just talked about with the Bulova. Number one, the lug width. It's got 2 millimeters more, so it gives it a bit of a heavier feeling as opposed to the more kind of delicate, light feeling that you get with this Jubilee bracelet. And again, even the bracelet style or the strap style makes a big difference, right? The Jubilee tends to be a little finer, feel a little bit lighter to the eye, whereas 20 millimeter with a sporty NATO, okay, this feels and wears bigger than this 40 millimeter, which really just blew my mind. I mean, I never thought I would wear a 36 millimeter watch. But after trying this on with the NATO, I was completely blown away at how much I liked how this looked on my wrist, a 36 millimeter. Okay. Something else that adds to this, if you look at how this Explorer with the NATO sits on my wrist, the NATO, because it pops out above the spring bars, top and bottom, the NATO actually adds some width. So it makes the watch feel even larger lug to lug, because it doesn't immediately drop down to my wrist and start hugging my wrist right off the case, right? You can see there's a little gap there. Whereas if we go back to the Bulova, and you'll see what I mean when I strap the Bulova on. The Bulova, you can see here how there's zero gap, right? That bracelet, which is fitted to the lugs, the shape of the lugs, immediately drops down. and hugs my wrist, right? So that, just in the way that that NATO lays on my wrist versus how this bracelet lays on my wrist, makes a huge, huge difference, all right? So let me pull another 40 millimeter in here. Okay, remember, this is a 40 millimeter diameter watch. Now, let's look at another 40 millimeter diameter watch. This is a Rolex reference 114060, which is the modern, what we call the maxi case version of the No Date Submariner. Now the maxi case, and I don't happen to have a pre-maxi case Submariner here for this video right now, but basically what the maxi case did was it took the lugs and made them kind of broader shouldered. So if you look at a pre-maxi case, these lugs are going to curve in more, and so the outer lug diameter, or the outer lug measurement, is shorter on a pre-maxi case. So if you look at this guy, the outer width, 27, call it 28 millimeters, okay? Whereas if we look at the outer width of the Bulova, right at the tips there, 21 and a half, huge, huge difference, right? And then again, we've got the 18 millimeter bracelet versus a 20 millimeter. 19.7, so officially it's a 20. But if you look at these two pieces, I mean, to me, this does not look like two 40 millimeter watches to the eye. There's a bit of an optical illusion going on here because of the case shape. You've got another factor that you want to look at is dial real estate. So if we look at dial real estate, which is basically the width of the crystal, okay, on the Bulova, just short of 29, while on the Explorer, oops, the crystal width over 30. So your dial real estate makes a big difference too. So whereas on the Explorer you're going to have a much thinner, that's kind of hard to measure, but you have a much thinner bezel, right? It's a lot of dial. Whereas on the Bulova you've got a thicker bezel. The bezel makes up more of it, but there's less dial real estate. All right, and then you've got very, very different case shapes. Same goes with the 40 millimeter Rolex Submariner. Right, so again, if we look at how these wear on the wrist, again, just a quick recap of the Bulova. To me, this feels pretty small. It wears small, and again, it's hard to see from the camera. You got to back away so there you can see really what it looks like. And now let's try on the Submariner, and you'll see what a huge, huge difference two 40 millimeter watches can look like on your wrist. Okay, huge difference. Okay, and again, there's a lot of factors, but probably the biggest factor between these two 40s is the outer diameter of the lugs. So this is broad, very broad shoulders, right? Whereas the Bulova has very narrow shoulders on the lugs, curves in really steeply from the edge of the case down to the tip of the lug. Whereas this one actually starts to curve back out again when it leaves the side of the case. So you've got those really broad shouldered lugs. To me, this looks a lot smaller just to the eye. Dial real estate, we didn't measure this guy. So almost 31, the most dial real estate, quite a bit more than the Bulova. And then also let's just take a quick look at the bezel width, which on the Sub, we're looking at just under 4. And on the Bulova, we're looking at, it's probably about a 0.5 millimeter difference, all right, which adds up to a full millimeter across the width of the watch. So I hope this kind of demonstrates that diameter is not the only thing that you should look at. And it's hard, right? These days, it's especially with things like micro brands, and a lot of the larger brands are going to more of an online type buying process where you may not be able to find it in a brand boutique or in an authorized dealer. The only place you can see it is on the internet. And so we look at Instagram and we look at websites and we try to look at wrist shots of the watch that we might be interested in. It's really important to look at all of the factors, right? Don't just look at case diameter and make a decision, because you might be missing out on a really cool piece, right? You might be passing up a super cool piece, or you might be buying a piece that you think is going to fit your wrist just fine, and then you buy it and it ends up hanging over the edge of your 6 3/4 inch wrist, or whatever it is, or 6.5. Perpetual Girl, when she wears this maxi dial Submariner, it looks big on her, and it really looks big and chunky. When she wears our two-tone Submariner, which is a 2007, so it's pre-maxi dial, and it's got more of more shapely lugs that have a shorter outer distance on the lug width, it looks more svelte on her wrist. And that's literally just a case shape change, a lug shape change, because they're both 40 millimeters. So I hope this helps you guys. I really just wanted to get this out there and get you thinking, because here we've got two 40 millimeter watches that wear very, very differently on the wrist. And then we have this, what to me would be a tiny little 36 millimeter that ends up wearing larger on my wrist than the 40 millimeter Bulova. So really important to look at all those measurements. At 11 Watches, we're gonna really make a concerted effort to make sure you guys know all of these various measurements when we do watch reviews, because most of the time, if you read a watch review on a website, you're going to get diameter. Sometimes you'll get thickness, not very often though, and thickness makes a big difference as well. Usually you'll get lug width, right, which tells you the width of the strap or the bracelet, and sometimes you'll get lug to lug, although that's also very rare. I like to almost always include lug to lug, because that's probably the most important measurement to look at in terms of understanding how a watch is going to wear on your wrist. So we're going to try to do a better job of making sure you guys have all of the information, because we want to make sure that you buy watches that fit your wrist, that you're happy with. There's nothing worse than buying a watch that you're super excited about. It arrives in the mail, and you pop it on your wrist and you go, oh my God, this doesn't fit like I thought it would. So we're going to really make a concerted effort to make sure we're giving you some of these measurements that you just don't get on other websites. And because I have a 7.5 inch wrist and Perpetual Girl has about a 6.5 to 6 3/4 inch wrist, we can actually give you guys those comparative wrist shots so you can see the difference between a smaller and a larger wrist. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope it helps you in your future watch selecting endeavors. Have a good one, and we will see you for the next On the Bench. Bye guys.